Hey everyone. By now, odds are that you have at least heard of Peanut the Squirrel and his less discussed but still important brother, Fred the Raccoon, who were seized and euthanized by the state of New York's Department of Environmental Conservation just recently. And this is one of those stories that seems so outrageous, so egregious on its face, that it galvanized millions of outraged Americans, and people around the world actually, to push for justice for Peanut and Fred. It also became a cultural phenomenon, appearing in an SNL skit, getting shoutouts from UFC fighters and Supreme Court justices, the whole thing. But if you haven't heard the tale of Peanut the Squirrel, or perhaps don't know the background, a brief primer. Peanut the Squirrel was a pet, an animal rescued all the way back in 2017 by a man named Mark Longo, after he saw the baby squirrel's mother tragically killed by a car, leaving the tiny baby squirrel alone with very little chance of survival on his own. Now, Mark nursed the squirrel for 8 months until he felt he was old enough and stable enough to be re-released into the wild as a more competent adult squirrel. But Peanut returned of his own accord only a day and a half later, with half of his tail missing, and Mark decided to take the squirrel under his wing. Peanut was such a beloved and amicable squirrel, so good with people and animals, that over time, Mark grew a huge social media following for Peanut on TikTok and Instagram. He was known for posing in various adorable outfits like this cowboy hat and these little crocheted bunny ears, and for his love of waffles. He was even known for being friends with Mark Longo's cat, Chloe. So he was a huge social media star, very cute and friendly, which made the raid on his owner's property a very public affair. Now, for some additional context here, Longo started his animal sanctuary called Peanut's Freedom Farm Animal Sanctuary in April 2023, the same time thereabouts that he bought the roughly 350-acre compound that has now become home to over 400 rescued animals. So not remotely a small operation, right? And the sanctuary's trouble with the state of New York apparently started in January of 2024, at least according to the DEC, after they say several licensed animal rehabilitators filed complaints with the department claiming Longo was operating an illegal wildlife sanctuary. And for the record, Mark admits this. He didn't have the correct license to operate the sanctuary, which did, under the state's laws, make his operation illegal. However, Mark also contends that he was in the process of having Peanut licensed as an educational animal, and that he was not contacted ahead of this raid on his compound to make any attempt to solve the paperwork concerns. Longo says that he had been given a tacit nod on top of this from the state for several months prior to this raid to kind of quietly go about his business on this sanctuary. So on October 30th, around 10 a.m., no less than 9 DEC agents conducted a 5-hour raid on the property, seizing both Peanut and Fred in the process. During the raid, Mark says that they questioned his wife about her immigration status, refused to allow him to use the restroom or feed his horses, and even asked if he had any cameras on the property they should know about. This was apparently the first question that they asked him. Furthermore, the DEC made no contact, apparently, with Mark for the next 2 days after stealing his animals from him. I know that's a loaded word, but it kind of seems that way, right? When his squirrel was first seized, Mark took to social media to post a message. He said, "Well, internet, you won. You took one of the most amazing animals away from me because of your selfishness. To the group of people who called DEC, there's a special place in hell for you." To make matters worse, he had to learn from a national news report that his animals had been euthanized as the result of Peanut allegedly biting one of the agents who seized them. DEC says that the purpose of the euthanization was to conduct a rabies test on the animals, which is a process that can't technically be carried out while the animal is still alive, as it requires testing parts of the animal's brain that can't be extracted while the animal is living. Now, in many cases involving people's dogs or cats and the fear of rabies, it's considered best practice to quarantine and hold an animal that is for any reason suspected of having rabies, as opposed to just euthanizing it right away. However, according to the DEC, that doesn't work so well with raccoons because of the way that these animals carry rabies. How these agents, who were reportedly wearing heavy protective gloves, managed to be bitten by the squirrel, or what the raccoon actually did at all to deserve euthanization himself, are both still a mystery. The warrant for the raid was apparently signed, curiously, by a family court judge from Chemung County, one Richard Rich Jr. So yes, Richie Rich literally signed off on this, and that sparked a lot of questions about why this was signed by this particular type of court judge, and what it was that the DEC was so concerned about as far as these animals or other people being in danger because of these animals. And in fact, what's strange here is that we now have this picture of the search warrant. It states that the DEC is suspicious about Mark Longo harboring unlicensed animals, but makes no mention whatsoever of rabies or other concerns they had about the well-being of anyone involved, be that person or animal. So if the animal's well-being was the concern, they never seem to actually articulate what those concerns stemmed from, and certainly whether they intended it or not, the result was about as bad for the well-being of these animals as it possibly could have been. Stranger still, if the point of the raid was to prosecute the owner of the sanctuary to punish him for illegal possession of animals, they failed to do even that. In fact, they haven't, even after 2 weeks, attempted to press any charges against Longo or confiscate any of his remaining roughly 400 animals whatsoever. Stranger still is how aggressively the state of New York went about guarding the results of these rabies tests on both animals. They refused the requests of several news organizations for the results of the tests, which would have been available at 72 hours later at the most, and made no comment whatsoever about the status of the employee who was allegedly bit by Peanut the squirrel. When the New York Post, who did a bunch of reporting on this, asked the DEC for the rabies test results from the incident, a spokesperson directed the Post to file a FOIA, or a Freedom of Information Act request, if they wanted any hope of seeing the results. And frankly, I found that rather odd. And I found it odd because given all of the pressure, the firestorm that was happening, all the pressure these guys were under, the threatening calls, the vicious online tirades that the agency was dealing with, you would think that they would go the transparency route here instead of playing hardball with the information. Another really odd little factoid I found here. Apparently, people have been trying to find another recorded instance of a person contracting rabies from a squirrel in the entire history of the state of New York, and were unable to find even a single example. And in fact, from nyc.gov's own website, there have never been any human rabies cases associated with a squirrel bite. Ever. Now, the actual internet backlash over this whole thing got absolutely enormous, and it started with this video Mark and his wife posted to Instagram and TikTok on Peanut's official fan accounts on November 1st, and this was the same day, keep in mind, that he'd had to learn from news reports that his boys had been executed by the state of New York. The caption for this video reads, "R.I.P. my best friend, thank you for the best 7 years of my life. Thank you for bringing so much joy to us and the world. I'm sorry I failed you, but thank you for everything. Y'all, we desperately need your help. Help us raise money to fight this and help Peanut Freedom Farm continue to help animals like Peanut."
Hi, everyone. I don't know how I'm going to say this. I just want to say thank you to all of you. Peanut was the best thing that ever happened to us. And we got confirmation that they put him down. I want to continue to fight this fight as much as I can, but we need all of you to come together and help us. Please continue to help us raise money for the ongoing legal battles and for our nonprofit so we can keep Peanut's name alive. Thank you all.
Before Peanut's execution, but after he was seized on October 30th, Mark and his wife also created a GoFundMe page for Peanut and the Freedom Farm, which was originally dedicated to getting his animals back, but became repurposed to raise money for the sanctuary and the legal battles that may ensue with the state of New York over all of this nonsense. And wow, did people show out for this GoFundMe. They also included an important wish list of supplies needed for the sanctuary as they prepare for the harsh New York winter. Over the next several days, Mark was interviewed extensively as his plight went viral.
2 days ago, 10 to 15 DEC officers raided my home for a raccoon and a squirrel. We used resources from this state to kill a squirrel and raccoon and raid my house as if I was a drug dealer.
Who do you think dimed you out on this? Who do you think, Mark, like they said for rabies? I mean, I looked up when I heard about this, I had seen your videos, by the way. My senior producer, Jonathan, called me about it, but I had seen it. People love it. I mean, it's one of the good things about social media. I mean, you did a great job with this animal. So I look up rabies, and they're pretty severe symptoms and demonstrations of behavior. Couldn't they have just observed the squirrel and the raccoon and said, well, they don't look rabid? And who told them that they might be rabid?
Sir, there's a quarantine period that is supposed to be happening. We did not hear from the DEC. We didn't even get a statement from the DEC. We heard it from another news station that they killed Peanut. Since they left my house, not a single DEC employee or state official even called me to tell me what happened. The woman who claimed, or the member who claimed to get bitten, everybody around here wore gloves. These are professionals who deal with animals on a daily basis, and you're going to tell me you got bit by a squirrel? None of this transpired. This was somebody out to get me. We moved to a small town to start a nonprofit animal rescue called Peanut's Freedom Farm. We understood that this internet sensation was a wave, and we wanted to turn it into something great, so we moved to New York from Connecticut.
This whole case is bizarre, and it really doesn't seem to make sense that they would do this. Over not having the right paperwork and without any attempt, apparently, to communicate with him beforehand. As Mark stated in the interview, it's almost like someone was out to get him. They apparently have a family court judge sign a warrant that sent 9 or more DEC officers to his home, where they immediately ask him if he has cameras in the house. They confiscate his animals. The squirrel somehow bites one of these agents who's wearing these super thick gloves. And then, despite there being not one recorded case of rabies contracted by humans via squirrel bite in the entire history of the state of New York, they euthanized this squirrel that has not left the house in several years to test it for rabies. And they didn't even tell him. He has to find out on TV. Then, they stonewall news media asking for the rabies test results, refused to press any sort of charges or issue any sort of citation or confiscate any of the other hundreds of animals. It's all just weird. The official statement we got on Friday, November 8th from the Police Benevolent Association of New York State was the first time we see a real defense of the DEC's actions that day, and I suspect that this was because the DEC was getting absolutely ripped apart online. Everyone was hunting for the names of the officers involved, and obviously I think this is very bad, but they even reported getting bomb threats to their office, none of which ended up being credible, but still. Pretty scary if you work in that office. The statement says, "The public has been greatly misled by a barrage of social media messaging that painted a partial picture of the investigation and triggered violent threats fueled by misinformation. Our environmental conservation officers understand and accept that they risk their lives every time they begin a shift, but they should never fear for their safety or that of their family for doing the job that they have taken an oath to do. We ask that the public keep in mind that these people are their friends, their family, and neighbors, and do not deserve to live in fear for upholding the law." The statement goes on to directly contradict what Longo told us about the department's failure to reach out to Longo to resolve the issue beforehand. It says, "Following up on these complaints, an environmental conservation officer contacted Mr. Longo, informing him that keeping a squirrel is illegal unless he was a licensed wildlife rehabilitator, with the intent of preparing the animal to re-enter nature. Mr. Longo told investigators that the squirrel had been released to the wild. After the warning was issued, complaints continued to be received by DEC, and DEC management ordered an investigation. A DEC investigator conducted a review of Mr. Longo's social media accounts, which showed that Longo had lied to the investigator and had not released the squirrel into the wild. In addition to keeping the squirrel in violation of the law, Longo had also taken in a raccoon, which appeared on social media postings as well. Mr. Longo's social media posts were the basis for the search warrant issued by a judge. Finally, addressing the incident that led to the euthanization, they say, after locating the squirrel, it bit one of the DEC civilian wildlife biologists through 2 pairs of protective gloves. Due to the injury, the Chemung County Department of Health was contacted and the squirrel and raccoon were turned over alive. The Chemung County Department of Health made the determination to humanely euthanize both, as it is the only way to test for rabies, as rabies testing requires taking a sample of brain matter. While squirrels do not typically carry rabies, the cohabitation with the raccoon, a species known as a vector for rabies, opened the possibility of animal-to-animal transmission, which placed the wildlife biologist in potential danger. This was unfortunate, but the decision was not made by the environmental conservation officers, investigators, or DEC wildlife biologists participating in the service of this warrant. So the PBA here contends that the DEC got tons of complaints from professional licensed wildlife rehabilitators about these animals, contacted Mark about it, Mark lied and told them he had released the squirrel, and then they discovered through monitoring his social media account that he had in fact not done so, and on top of that had now added a raccoon. They also say that the only reason they chose to euthanize the animals, and they blame the Chemung County Department of Health here, right, for that decision, was because of Peanut's proximity to the raccoon, which is a well-known rabies vector. And according to them, it's as simple as that. As this story developed, another discovery was made that caused some people to question Longo's motives behind all of this squirrel stuff. It came to light that Longo had an OnlyFans page where he posted some not safe for work content under the moniker Squirrel Daddy. Some people started to accuse him of turning Peanut into a cynical cash grab and using his tragedy to funnel money into his own pockets. The accusations gained enough steam with a skeptical portion of the public that TMZ straight up asked him about it.
We've done some X-rated material on OnlyFans, perfectly legal.
Right, we're not trying to promote this. I've been hearing people that I'm trying to promote my pages. This is not anything that's what's going on. I want justice for my animals. So what we're brainstorming is was there a different motive here?
Did you get a citation?
No citation. I didn't get arrested. I got nothing. I got 3 pieces of paperwork and they were gone.
This discovery also gave rise to a theory about why the DEC had actually raided his compound, why their very first question to him was whether he had cameras in the house, and why he was never slapped with any charges after the raid. Some speculated that this entire raid was actually because his neighbors had a problem with his OnlyFans content, because he, also along with his wife, by the way, was involved in babysitting some of the neighborhood's children from time to time.
And you babysit kids in the neighborhood from your neighbors. And so what we're hearing is that somebody made an anonymous call who had a problem with you guys, maybe because of that. Why would they ask you, are there cameras, if they're just there to seize animals?
Why wouldn't the first question be,
where are they?
Where's the squirrel?
Where are they?
Where's the raccoon?
At no point is it acceptable for this question to arise. It's more of the fact that you were looking for something else. And this is all my opinion because we don't have facts at the moment right now. But you're telling me with what I do for side work for a little bit of extra money that I donate to the sanctuary. And it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I know that's not why we're here.
It's legal. It's totally legal.
And as internet hunters attempted to track down the culprit of the anonymous calls about Peanut that would lead to his tragic death, and of course the tragic death of Fred the raccoon, who must not be forgotten, the harrowing affair would claim a 3rd victim of this raid. This time, a human. You see, in the fervor to find the culprit, the internet did something that, let's be honest, it does all the time and really needs to chill with. They falsely accused a young woman of being behind the calls that led to the raid. That woman was named Monica Kiesler, who Longo himself alleged on his own social media page, called her out and everything, was the real culprit and could expect a lawsuit. only to later delete the post, citing not enough evidence that it was really her. To his credit, he tried to correct the mistake by asking his fans to stop spreading unverified accusations, but it was too late. The damage was done. The internet dragged and harassed Monica Kiesler and her entire family to the point where Monica Kiesler would file an open records request with the DEC to get proof that it wasn't her. When they obliged and proved her innocence in a public statement, she took the opportunity to strike while the iron was hot and went on an iHeartRadio podcast that you've probably never heard of called Veronica Live to talk about her experience. She shares that she and her family were actually big fans of Peanut the Squirrel and had cried when they found out what had happened to them, which made this turn of events all the more upsetting. She was being blamed for the death of a beloved animal that she herself had followed and loved. Monica became collateral damage in what ultimately was a reckless and callous pursuit of justice on the internet, following an unfortunate pattern of false, life-ruining accusations that have upended literally hundreds of people's lives over the past few years. It serves as a stark reminder that while we all feel the burning desire to see justice done, these are real people behind the screen with lives and families and careers, and dotting our I's, crossing our T's, and doing our due diligence is as important as it ever has been. Fast forward now to November 12th. Remember how I said that the state of New York was being all hush-hush about these rabies results? Well, eventually, either because of the pressure from the public or because they needed time to get organized, they did give us the results of the test. And as you probably suspected by now, they came back completely negative. But along with the revelations about the test results came a timeline of events obtained by the New York Post which would prove damning. And I'm going to warn you, this next part is going to bother you and probably outrage you, because despite giving the appearance this entire time in all of their various statements that the euthanization was the result of an unbelievable super chomp through 2 pairs of thick, heavy protective gloves, and just because of this, it was a precautionary measure, the timeline given to the New York Post in a November 12th article reveals that Peanut and Fred had been targeted for execution more than a week before the raid even happened. On October 22nd, they got a recommendation from the health department of New York City to euthanize the animals in case they had been exposed to rabies. They were marked for death before the raid had even begun. The Post reports that on October 29th, as the DEC planned the raid on their home, they had already coordinated the euthanization of both animals with Elmira Animal Control. Peanut and Fred were, despite what DEC agents and the union had told us, targets from the very beginning. The bombshell revelation is perhaps the strongest evidence yet that this raid was a targeted and malicious affair, with a specific intent to target and kill these animals, which were integral to the funding and survival of this animal sanctuary. As for Mark Longo, he was interviewed by USA Today in an article published the very next day, on November 13th, where he vowed to get justice for his fallen furry friends. He also reveals that the animal sanctuary costs he and his wife about $25,000 a month to operate, about half of which is paid for by his sanctuary social media content, and the other half from his social media managing company. And if Mark's posting daily on TikTok and aggressively marketing the sanctuary in the wake of Peanut and Fred's death is not even making the payments for the sanctuary, it feels reasonable to assume he's probably not doing all of this for the riches. It also kind of means he's doing all that marketing for a good cause and doing something that he's very good at. It's hard to fault him for that. The same day that this article was published, he sat down with 18 News' Jim Turpin to confirm that he is very serious about pursuing a lawsuit over this, perhaps several, and also reveals his support for Peanuts Law, the work of Assemblyman Jake Blumenkratz of Long Island's 15th Assembly District, which would ensure both humane treatment and due process for sanctuary animals. We wish him well in his coming legal battles with the DEC and the state of New York, and we implore him to seek all of his necessary paperwork so that all of his T's are crossed and his I's dotted next time the law comes a-knockin'. We'll of course continue following along with this story for updates as the legal battle that's almost certainly coming unfolds. I'm sure many of you are itching to see some punishment. But for now, what do you make of all this? Was Mark ultimately in the wrong for failing to acquire the necessary paperwork, or apparently lying to the public by saying that he had never been contacted by these people in advance? Or is this just an example of a grotesque and inexcusable overreach of government power? And what do we make of the fact that Peanut and Fred seem to have been marked for execution before the raid even began? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching. Alright, see ya!